Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Rolka. Thank you for joining me for questions from comments 27. Really glad to see that people are picking up the pace on the questions. It's super fun. If we get a ton of questions, I will eventually perhaps start to break it down into two separate segments so that I can cover the subject matter adequately. But this particular week, I think it's perfectly fine. Once again, my apologies. Still too chilly in here for the old lava lamp, but what are you gonna do? You gotta get to it. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for the questions. Let's get started. My A always sounds very nasal, and the ah turns into aw when I get to the higher notes. Is there a way to fix this? Absolutely. That's what vowel alignment is all about. One of my favorite exercises to work on these types of vowel alignment issues. You got to find your anchor vowels. It can be different for everybody. A lot of times it's an E vowel, but that's not always going to be the case. So you've got to find the vowel that aligns reasonably well for your own phonation. And then what I like to do is take the vowels that need practice and sandwich them in between instances of your anchor vowel. And a great exercise for this is a very straightforward pattern. It's a 1-3-1-5-1 scale, or 1-2-3-2, 1-2-3-4-5, 4-3-2-1, do re mi fa so fa mi re do. And it's very straightforward. Again, let's use the example of E. So I put the A vowel in between the two instances of E. We want to try and keep it as much the same as we possibly can. In the early stages of this exercise, the A vowel, in this case, might be very similar in sound and shape and all that to the E vowel. And then over time, we learn to give it enough distinction so that we hear it as an A vowel, but we do not have all the unwanted artifacts like nasality that you're mentioning there. Ah can be a little bit trickier because E and ah are not so closely related. You can still do that exercise with ah. But it's better if you do it with A. However, that means that you've got to get your A vowel in alignment first. So, as you've kind of asked your question, work with the A vowel first, and then once that is suitably well aligned, start working with the ah vowel with it. How do you keep the expansion when singing? I think I lose it a bit when I start singing, like I'm not still engaged, but also a bit collapsed. I don't know. I'm not saying I don't know, it's in the question. It's not like when I first breathe in, but it's not fully collapsed either. At the he exercise, with every he, my ribs go a bit inward and then expand again when I breathe in. Like breathe and expand, sing, relax a bit, and then breathe in and expand again. Maybe I'm pushing out too much air. Quite likely a combination of factors. The good news is that if you have that lateral expansion, you're getting there. Like you're getting to the apogeo. Maintaining that expansion is one of the chief challenges in the early stages of adapting one's breathing to apogeo breath management, at least in my opinion. The tendency will be to use far too much muscle tension. I cannot say for certain if that's a necessary step, but it's certainly one that I went through and a lot of my clients also go through when they are working on apogeo. The more that you can maintain that lateral expansion without collapsing and also without getting too tense will make the whole process go more quickly for you. One of the things that you can look to are the solar plexus. This is the area right below the xiphoid, which is the bottom point on your sternum. So where the ribs come together and you have the sternum, or sometimes called the breastbone, where the rib cage meets and it's connected, that bottom point, right below it, you have your solar plexus, the top of the rectus abdominis muscles. Look to that area for the articulation. When you are doing the he exercise, if you could reach through the screen and put your hand right here on my person, right below the xiphoid, you would feel just a sort of twitching of that musculature when I do the articulation. Meanwhile, everything else is remaining constant. If you're doing the he exercise and you're finding it challenging, and you are taking breaths in between the he's, remove the breaths. So, for example, most of the time that exercise goes something to the effect of he, he. As an intermediary step, he. Don't take the breath. The breath is an additional challenge to try to, challenge you to keep that lateral expansion. But if that's standing in the way right now, get rid of the breaths, and then once you can do the exercise, maintaining your lateral expansion and getting nice staccato articulations with the he sound, then put the breaths back in. Take that challenge back on, and that will make your technique even more precise and more effective. Great question. Hey Jeff, I was wondering if it is ineffective to practice interval training if you have not internalized tonal harmonic structure. I think that's kind of a chicken and egg question. Practicing the intervals will also help you internalize those intervallic structures and harmonic structures that we use. And I'm assuming that you're talking about Western tonal music. So if that's not the case, then please follow up with me so that I can rectify that question. But I'm assuming you're talking about Western tonal music. So they kind of work to inform one another. What you could do, however, is I'm assuming that you meant internalized from an aural or ear training perspective. You might spend a little bit of time cracking the old books and learning those structures in the written format so that you know that what a major third is, what a minor third is, what a major second is, what a perfect fifth is. Knowing what those intervals are, how they're constructed, looking at some examples from various keys, that would all expedite the process, or at least give you something that is concrete, as much as music is concrete, a concrete thing to look at for your practice. I'm going to grab a drink of water. I will edit it out so you don't have to hear me glugging. Hydration is key, pun intended. Question. You did say you were increasing question videos, and so must need material. It's not that I need more, well, thank you anyway for the question. I appreciate that. It's not that I need more material, but I like these videos. I like the questions, and I like the idea of serving the singing community in this way. So it seems like a win-win-win. If there's more than a win-win, you got a win-win-win, right? It's fun, it's engaging, it's interesting. Hopefully these answers will help folks that are, working on their voices and doing stuff. So that's really the main thrust of the whole thing. I'm not sure I understand. Okay, great. Cool question. I am not sure I understand the difference between the terms portamento, slur, scoop, and glissando. I know that scooping is considered poor technique, but in reading dictionary definitions, it's not clear how that differs from glissando. Any thoughts? Yeah, this is another one of those cases where, when I talk about mixed voice and falsetto and head voice and voce piena in testa and cricothyroid dominant singing voice, or M2, I think it is, there's not consensus on the usage of these terms. So when I read this question, I thought, well, I think I've got a pretty good handle on this, but let's double check my memory I went and looked up the definitions, and you can find readily available examples of portamento where very, very legitimate scholarly works are contradicting one another. What I can do, however, is give you some working definitions as I have encountered them in a sort of scholarly context in my studies and training, but also in common usage. So first one, portamento. Portamento in many respects is used as another word for a glide between pitches, so it's synonymous with glissando. However, in common usage, when you talk about portamento, it usually means more of a slurring through the pitches as opposed to where on a woodwind instrument, if you're doing a glissando, you're not necessarily going to try to bend in between the notes on the piano. So you would, in a portamento, and I'm thinking about like on a keyboard. Now, the keyboard I'm using right now doesn't have a portamento wand. And when you do a portamento on a keyboard, it smears in between the semitones. So if you're trying to go from D to E, it would not only go through the D sharp E flat, but it would go through all the different little cents, breaking down all the different permutations in between the two pitches, in addition to the E flat. So it would just really smear through those pitches. Whereas a glissando often is used either diatonically or chromatically. So you would kind of do all the intervening pitches between the two pitches that are in question, but you're going to either stick to the scale or you're going to do them chromatically. This is the only way, for the most part, that you're going to be able to do glissando on, for example, a keyboard or on a woodwind instrument. So for example, if there's a sheet of music and it has a glissando between those two A's, unless I have a pitch bend or portamento wand, I can't bend in between the various pitches. So what I can do is just go through the notes. And here I just dragged my finger across the white keys. If I had to do it chromatically, and I am not a great piano player, obviously, a great piano player or even a better piano player, which isn't really asking for much in my instance here, I'm a piano operator, really, they would be able to play that much more quickly, and you would get more of a glissando kind of a feel. The closest thing that you can get to a portamento without a portamento wand on a piano is kind of a trick of the ear, where what you do is to sort of make it sound like I'm portamentoing, like doing a gliss or a scoop up to this pitch. I'm going to strike both these keys at the same time, and it kind of makes your ear hear as if the pitch is being bent. But it's not. I'm just striking both of those pitches simultaneously and then releasing the lower one before your ear really has a chance to hear the major second in between them. And it sounds as if it's a bending of the pitch. Slurring, again, can often be used synonymously with these words and may very well be done so. But in woodwind instruments and brass wind instruments too, it is when you do not tongue the individual notes. So if I were, for example, playing a saxophone, you can tongue or articulate each of the notes. Where my tongue is actually touching the reed. Or you can just keep moving air into the instrument without using your tongue. And that is a slur. So articulating slurring. Just one of the ways that you can interact with the instrument. As it relates to singing, it is usually marked between pitches that are not immediately adjacent, or they can be adjacent to, and it's referring to legato singing. So we would sing as smoothly between the pitches as possible. And that, of course, brings us to the other point of legato. In, for example, the Vakai books, he describes portamento much the same way that we would describe legato. So the long answer to your question is that there isn't or has not been consistent usage of these terms over the history of music. They can be used differently depending on the context that you are working within. So if you are working with singers who have a background in woodwind playing or backgrounds in playing pianos or keyboards, they may all have different understandings of these different markings in music and how they are typically used, as well as the usage of these terms. Like so many other terms in music, context is what's necessary to really understand their usage. So understanding the context of the composer or the works that you're working on, the history of that individual and their usage historically, or if you are in a choir or working with a small group of vocalists or instrumentalists or an ensemble where you're the vocalist, knowing the context of the usage of those terms. I hope that helps. Great, great question. Surprisingly tricky, I thought. Hi Jeff, I usually do this warm-up in the morning. After doing this warm-up, I noticed I have a hard time warming up my higher range, like G3, G4. So I believe this comment was left on a gentle warm-up video. I usually do lip trill videos once, since vowels can be tricky for me in the morning. Should I continue using baritone lip trill to warm up that higher part of the range, or possibly do the baritone lip trill video twice? Really depends on what it is that's difficult for you about warming up into the upper register of your voice. It's hard to know exactly what it might be. Without knowing what's going on for you specifically, my concerns would be that in the gentle warm-up, you are being too heavy with the usage of your voice, and so you are being very thyroarytenoid dominant in the way that you are singing those exercises. That, to me, would be the most likely scenario that would then prevent you from being able to do the upper register exercises. So what you might do is switch things up a little bit. Do the lip trill video first, then do the gentle warm-up, if I'm remembering this correctly, and then move on to your registration event exercises. In other words, use the lip trill practice to get a greater overall balance of your usage of the musculature of your voice, and then start the process of warming up the vowels and see if that has an impact on your practice. Hello, Jeff. I noticed that whenever I listen to someone sing or whenever I sing in my head, that's the key thing right there, or practicing a speech in my head, I found that my throat is tired without even using my voice. And you're saying, why was this? Somehow I cut off half the question there. I'm sorry about that. You're probably sub-vocalizing, or even if you're not making noise, you may be engaging your vocal folds along with the process of that internal dialogue that you have going on. This is not unusual. What you might try to do, silly as it may sound, is rather than only practicing in your head, practice the speech or the piece that you're working on with a lip trill. So do the lip trill. The lip trill is if you can do the lip trill, it's a great way to practice your voice in a less engaged but still productively engaged capacity. In other words, it's not like sub-vocalizing where we can be using a lot of vocal fold engagement, a lot of muscle tension around the larynx. and neither is it sort of wispy and airy where you're kind of letting the vocal folds separate, abduct, and air is spilling over. Try that and see if that has a positive impact and if it maybe keeps you a little bit less fatigued from those internalized practices. Love this next question, great question. How does singing the vowels actually help? As in, can you explain what happens exactly that helps with our singing? Thanks in advance, this is such a beneficial series, so thank you for that, I appreciate it. The vowels are what phonate. That is the overarching concept here. So when we sing music with lyrics, or for that matter, if we're singing music that doesn't have lyrics, we are singing vowels. The consonants don't phonate. If you want to have consistent performance of your voice, if you want to sing in tune, and if you want to be able to then expand that to include a greater overall range of your voice, the vowels are where it's at. We have to work with the vowels. Now, vocalizations, as you find on my channel, so let's be clear, the warm-up videos on my channel are vocalizations. They are exercises that I have constructed over the years that have helped vocalists align their vowels. What does that mean? That means that when I sing, those two vowels sound and perform as much as they possibly can while still changing vowels. An example of how they might not. Those are two very different sounding vowels. It is worth mentioning that singing vowels is different than speaking vowels. Even in the so-called speaking range of our voices, which is where I'm singing, I am phonating these vowels differently than I might speak them. This is so that they align. The E is less pinched and narrow and forward. The A is more focused than it might be from my habitual speaking patterns. We work beginning with the 5 cardinal vowels, and this translates directly to the vowels in our songs. So, for example, I'm going to make a video about the C consonant, and I'm going to use the phrase, can you face the change? Ka, a, u, fe, a, the, che, a. Those are the vowels from that phrase. If my vowels are not in alignment, can you face the change? Now, I'm exaggerating quite a lot here, but you get my point. That makes that line hard to follow. Intonation is questionable. It just doesn't sound, in my opinion, particularly musical. If we align the vowels, now the musical line becomes more obvious. We can hear that there's a melody there, basic as it is. Vowel alignment facilitates that, and so that is why we practice the vowels. On another kind of overview of why we practice vowels, it is because it is easy and predictable. We use easy and predictable patterns in vocal pedagogy so that you can easily observe how your voice is operating. They are much simpler than even the most basic of songs because the rhythm is the same, the patterns are utterly predictable, and they repeat over and over and over again. Even the most basic of songs will have changes rather soon once you begin the melody. So they're easy, they're predictable, they let us work on the mechanics of our voice, and ultimately that vowel alignment translates into our songs, our repertoire, making, even if you don't want to say it's overall better, it gives you more control so that you can make artistic choices about how you use your voice in your songs. I hope that answers your question. Great question. Such a problem. When I sing your exercises, chants for tenor, I get a good transition to posagio. The sound is clear and quiet. I assume they mean over the secondo passaggio. That's not necessarily true, but that's how I'm interpreting it. As soon as I start singing any song again, the old habits start working again. And again, I seem to forget how to make transitions and correctly switch to the posagio and again start to pull chest register or switch to falsetto. Although if I start doing your chanting exercises for tenor again, I immediately remember how to sing correctly and skillfully. What should I do? Kind of exactly what you're already doing. What you are reporting is totally normal, happens to all of us. Going from a vocalization right into a song will eventually work when the way that you sing the vocalizations becomes the way that you sing those pitches, as opposed to something that you are doing in an exercise. When it becomes the habit, then you will have a much greater chance of habitually going to that mode of phonation in the repertoire, even if the song is new. Until that becomes habit, and quite frankly, even after, just to kind of stay sharp, use the intermediary. Alternate between doing the vocalization and then singing the song. And I mean a one-to-one alternation. So vocalization, song, vocalization, song. If you want to be more specific to the song, then turn the melody into a vocalization. For example, a moment ago I demonstrated, "Can you face the change?" And as an intermediary, I removed all the consonants. Can you face the change? Constructing vocalizations from your melodies, it's a very good way to bridge the gap between technique in a vocalization and that which you can apply in your repertoire. There's quite likely to be a gap or a sort of what you can do ultimately in a vocalization versus what you can do in your repertoire, but that gap gets smaller and smaller the more that you do practices like that. Great question. Is it normal to struggle with the short notes more than the long ones? I honestly struggle with pitch in general. Like I hear the note, but it's hard getting my vocals to replicate the actual pitch. I think I'm just tone deaf. Okay, well, if you can hear that, you're not tone deaf, right? So we can dismiss that, I think, on fairly short order. I'm sorry to have to say that I think that you're mistaken here in your assessment of your long tones. If you're saying that you struggle with pitch in general, presumably that means both short and long pitches. Therefore, you're not really executing the long tones particularly effectively. The short ones are perhaps more immediate and you are noticing the discrepancies more immediately, and that is in fact a good thing because that is showing you where there are deficiencies. Your technique, your air column, your engagement, your appoggio is not quite working as best as it could. So the short exercises are meant to help the vocal fold feel the amount of subglottic air pressure, air from below the epiglottis, below the vocal fold, so that it can determine how much vocal fold engagement is required to produce the pitch in a neutral fashion. So, he, 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 he. If you are not maintaining lateral engagement, if you are not maintaining reasonably consistent engagement through your core body muscles in general, not crushing but consistent, then those staccato utterances of pitch will not come out very effectively. However, those practices are what can help you learn to do it. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, if you're doing an exercise that has those staccato pitches, but it has breaths in between them, take the breaths out. So, for example, in those arpeggios I just sang, I didn't breathe in between the notes. I sang he, 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 he. And I maintained my engagement throughout the duration of the exercise. Practice doing that. Then put breaths back in there to challenge your ability to quickly but take a small little sip of air and then get coordinated again and maintain your engagement and see if the quality changes. If you get a dramatically different quality, keep practicing with the breaths a little bit, but know that you still have to do them without the breaths. It is a practice, it is a process. Physical and visual, if you are sighted, observations of how you're using lateral expansion can be very helpful. If you get a TheraBand, those elastic bands that are sometimes used in yoga practices to wrap around your rib cage so you can feel the rib cage expanding and pressing into it, can also be very helpful in this practice. Keep at it though. Stick with the short staccato utterances, but do assess how you are using your body to engage so that you are getting good engagement. Questions from, I think it's questions from comments number 6. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description. Has the most recent really comprehensive demonstration of me showing this practice, and I'm wearing a shirt that's very sheer so you can see my body and how it moves. I'll try to put a link in the description. You can check that out and hopefully that will help too. How can I know for sure where trying to attain the highest note in my range is too high to aspire to for my voice? I know this sounds silly, but much of the music that seems like it is in my range, including the lowest notes, are a puzzle for me to know if it helps or hurts my voice to try to improve my technique to be able to sing them happily and consistently without fear. I should probably have inferred punctuation marks, but punctuation marks are awesome and can be very helpful. Renee Fleming writes in her autobiography that in the beginning she had no high notes. She acquired them through lessons. Thanks for advice. Is it any surprise that I agree with Renee Fleming? I mean, and who would I be to disagree? Though on occasion I have been known to disagree with some. But in this case, yeah. The reason why we have technique is to come to a greater understanding of how our voices operate and be able to consistently, sustainably access the outerlying areas of our voices. This is why most vocal training begins in the thyroarytenoid dominant singing voice, or so-called speaking range, and then progresses outward from there. There is not necessarily an objective reason to continually press yourself to sing higher and higher or lower and lower pitches. If your artistic needs require that, then technique, training, observation, lessons, if you can manage it, will all help in those pursuits. Coming to an understanding of your voice and how it operates, however, is going to be, in my opinion, really the most necessary component in accessing those outerlying areas of your voice. Whether or not to know if it's well outside of your range or too hard or too high or too low or any of those things, it's really hard to say because it may ultimately not be so far outside of your range, but it might be outside of your range right now. And to get an understanding of where it is in relationship to your usable range, maybe plank out the notes on the piano. So find the note that is in question. If it's some very high note or very low note, find it on the piano. Do your vocalizations. Note the differences between the two. If it's a lot lower or a lot higher, then exploring the technique involved in accessing those areas of your voice would be the way to begin the process of adding that tessitura to your usable range. I hope that helps. There's a bit of vocal pedagogy ease in that answer, so if you have any questions or follow-ups, please drop them in the comments section. But in short, I think the great Renee Fleming said it best. There's a speaking range, a thyroarytenoid dominant range in our voices, outside that range, we need to come to an understanding of how our voice operates and work with it, whether in lessons or through careful observation and technique, to then access those areas of our voices in a healthy, sustainable, consistent way so you can reproduce it again and again. Great questions, one and all. Thank you so much. I do hope this helps. My name's Jeff. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. Thank you if you are a contributor on Patreon. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing, and hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.